Welcome to HeadLocke, the official podcast of the John Locke Foundation. I'm Mitch Kokai. As governments at all levels have responded to the COVID-19 pandemic, we've often heard officials talk about basing their decisions on science. That's why the topic of this edition of HeadLocke should interest all of us. We're going to talk about a document called the Great Barrington Declaration. And joining us with insight about the Declaration is Jeffrey Tucker. He is editorial director at the American Institute for Economic Research. Thanks for joining us.
It's my pleasure, and thank you for having me.
This declaration resulted from a meeting that took place in the early days of October. Tell us about this meeting and why it came about.
Right. The declaration was written last weekend. So it would have been, the second week of October? I don't know. I've lost track of time. But yes, it began in early October. What happened was that, most scientists, serious scientists, are not political people. And they never expected, they're in science and in epidemiology and immunology and public health because they want to help people and minimize the social damage of infectious diseases and pathogens. They're scientific people, not political people. Unfortunately, because of lockdowns, suddenly disease became highly political. Never should have happened, but it happened. And they found themselves in an awkward position. So after months, some of them began to speak out. I noticed one in particular, Martin Kulldorff. And then also I noticed Sunetra Gupta, who's a godlike figure within epidemiology, and then also Jay Bhattacharya, who's a similarly highly credentialed MD, PhD, you name it, at Stanford. Sunetra is over at Oxford, and Kulldorff is Harvard. I noticed that they started to speak out a little bit. And I began to feel bad for Martin because I thought, it must be a lonely life over at Harvard being against lockdowns at this point and taking a risk to his career to speaking out this way. So I just quickly dropped him a Twitter note. I said, listen, we've got a nice place here. Why don't you come and visit us 2 hours away? We'll feed you well and you could just relax a little bit. And he wrote me back, much to my shock, okay. And so when I realized Kulldorff was coming, I dropped a note to an attorney in New Jersey, Stacey Rudin, and then another public defender in New York who had become anti-lockdown. This would have been Janine Udis. And I said, listen, Martin Kulldorff's coming, why don't you join? So they all came here. We had no agenda whatsoever. We ended up going out to cideries and actually enjoying each other's company and getting to know each other, new friends, because he had lost all of his old friends. It's a big risk to be anti-lockdown these days. You've lost friends. I've lost friends. We've gained friends. We've lost friends too. This is a very intense moment. So we just had a really lovely weekend and kind of an emotional weekend. He went away. Well, within about 10 days or something, he wrote me back. He said, I have an idea. Let's bring some high-end journalists and from around the country, all meeting at your place. And then I'll get Jay Bhattacharya flown in from Stanford, and then I'll get Sunetra Gupta from Oxford. Well, I was breathless. I was like, that sounds interesting. When do you propose to do this? Because we can't do it to the 31st of October. And he said, no, we're going to do it this weekend. He said, we can't wait till the 31st. The crisis is too intense. So next thing you know, we've got all these people here and we're scrambling to get the recordings right. And we didn't have a big agenda, but we held a question and answer session, taped a few interviews and that sort of thing. But they wrote the declaration and released it. We released the website, built it and released it within 18 hours, something like that. And it was all just kind of crazy and wonderful. But I have to tell you that what was driving the energy behind the whole thing was not strategy. It was not. It wasn't a conspiracy, unlike what the left-wing press is claiming. It was moral passion, the desire of these doctors to make a difference in the world, to stop the war on the poor, save the working class, save businesses, save the arts, save modernity from these ghastly lockdowns. That's what was driving these three great people. They very easily grabbed another 50 people. They're grabbing another 1,000 to public estate as co-signers. But meanwhile, we have about 8,700 scientists and another, I think, close to 20,000 public health officials who have signed the Great Barrington Declaration. As of just a little bit ago, about 385,000 citizens.
Well, as this was first announced after the meeting that took place in the early days of October, you mentioned already the three primary authors coming from Harvard, Stanford, and Oxford. And at the time, with the initial announcement, you already had almost 3 dozen co-signers. You mentioned many more now. And for those who haven't seen it yet, for people watching on video, I will hold it up here. The notes and the coloring are mine, but otherwise you could see it's one page, but it's a very powerful one page. When you saw this Great Barrington Declaration, what did you think?
I was there while it was being drafted. I was very moved. I made a couple of suggestions here and there. Basically, what's striking about it is it's a basic statement of public health. We need to think about not just one disease, but all diseases. We need to think about not just physical health, but psychological health and the well-being of people to make choices and that sort of thing. And that's all that's suffering. And the closing the schools, has been catastrophic. So public health in the sense of the well-being of society, that's what the document is really about. And what they say is that these lockdowns have not achieved their aims. In fact, they've led to a public health catastrophe. And then they end by talking about an epidemiological truth that everybody has known for at least 70 years, which is that all viruses are mitigated through herd immunity. And they brought up that phrase, which has become a strange taboo. They've brought it back. Not only have they brought it back, but they actually they managed to cause a shift in the World Health Organization policy in 1 week. So if your listeners ever doubt the importance of moral courage and changing the world, this is a prime example. They stood up, stuck their necks out, took all the slings and arrows, but they've already made the world a better place.
We're going to talk about some of the specifics in the Declaration, not all of them, but people can read it very quickly because it does take up just a single page. But in the very first sentence, they talk about their grave concerns about damaging physical and mental health impacts, and call for something instead, right there in the first paragraph, and then they describe it a little bit more a little bit later on the page, focused protection. Not the lockdowns, but something different called focused protection. Why do you think that is something that is a good alternative to what we've been seeing from governments at all levels?
It's because that's what we've done since World War II. Every single time a pandemic has come along, whether it's 1948, 51, 57, 58, 68, 69, 2006, 2009, the advice has always been, in a ever more precise ways, vulnerable populations, protect yourself, everyone else, you need to develop immunities. You need to upgrade your immune system. That's been the advice. And even my mother knew this. She knew this, her mother's mother did it, and so on. It's the way that societies have learned to deal with disease, not through massive disruption, much less lockdown, but through normal social functioning and intelligence. Intelligent protection of the vulnerable population. The key to public health in the presence of a new pathogen is to discover who is vulnerable, which we've known since February, and to make sure that those populations are protected while the rest of us develop immunities. And through the magic of science or mathematics, whatever you want to call it, once a certain number have encoded the new viral information into their immune system, the virus comes under control, at least temporarily. Or when I say temporarily, maybe it's for a full generation and in one area, but that's how we control viruses. That's how we've always mitigated disease, and that's what the document reveals. It's in other words, there's nothing new in this document. It's the old wisdom, and it's how we dealt with H1N1 in 68, 69, and the Asian flu in 57, 58, polio in 48, 51, and so on. You don't want to destroy the normal function of society, because when you do that, make everything even worse, and that's what the document points to.
We are chatting with Jeffrey Tucker. He is editorial director at the American Institute for Economic Research, which is the group that organized the scientists, top epidemiologists, and others who came together to put forward this Great Barrington Declaration. I like the fact that the Declaration, in talking about protecting the vulnerable, does offer some specifics. It talks about what you should do for nursing homes, what retired people living at home should do. So it doesn't just say, let people fend for themselves. It does offer some ideas for helping those who really need the help.
Of course. And again, we needed normal social functioning so we could act intelligently. And, but what's interesting, it's like, I'm not entirely sure, here's what's interesting. There's a little bit of a knowledge gap. When you turn a certain age, and if you have certain health difficulties, you start reading up, you start getting self-interested. What do I need to do to protect myself in a way that's different from when I was younger? It's just like when older people go to the gym, they know not to push themselves too hard because they have a greater chance of muscle injury. Now, when you're 25, you don't think about that. But when you're 70, you do. It's similarly with infectious diseases. If you've got heart disease problems, history of heart disease, diabetes, and you're 70, 80 years old, and and flu seasons comes around, it's probably not the best time to go to a Justin Bieber concert in a stadium of 10,000 people.
If you wanted to at age 70 anyway.
Yeah, or at any age. Actually, I'm a fan of Justin Bieber, but anyway. You know to do this, right? And what's interesting, I've noticed this, that people find it inconceivable that people can act intelligently during a pandemic. Well, when it's in your self-interest, you do act intelligently. Now, in the case of long-term care facilities, there's plenty of people that are in them that can act on their own. So that becomes an issue of real management. And the catastrophe that happened in the Northeast, especially, is that three governors, at least, New Jersey, New York, and Massachusetts, ordered COVID-19 patients into the long-term care facilities, right? They contracted COVID, they put them back in, or they took new COVID patients of a certain age and put them along, and required that long-term care facilities take them, and prevented them from testing them, or they discriminated against them. That led to a disaster. I think last time I checked, in Connecticut alone, 80% of the victims of COVID-19 were long-term care facilities residents. And I know where I live in the Berkshires, almost all of them, the deaths from COVID-19 were from long-term care facilities. And that was a direct consequence of catastrophic management. This is why this the strategy promoted by the Great Barrington Declaration is so important, because it repudiates these forced efforts on the part of governors to make the long-term care facilities accept in COVID-19 patients. Now, why did they do that? Right? That's a very, very interesting question. The thinking was that they had to preserve the hospitals for new patients which, by the way, never arrived. So it was a kind of a good example of how central planning doesn't work. They anticipated that their hospitals would be overwhelmed, so they shoved everybody into long-term care facilities and paid them to take patients that spread the disease among the most vulnerable populations, while emptying out the hospitals, many of whom are going bankrupt today. So the level of error is basically shocking, and there are investigations ongoing in New York, Connecticut, Massachusetts about this, but the governors are reluctant to release any information. But all of this is going to come out, my friend. There is no chance that these scandals are going to be suppressed. But the Great Barrington Declaration represents a complete repudiation of all those principles, and a recommendation that society act intelligently with caution in the presence of a new pathogen until we can develop herd immunity, which might have happened already if we had gone about this the right way.
Once again, it is called the Great Barrington Declaration. It focuses on a strategy called focused protection. And I want to read, you've already referenced this, but I want to read some of the sentences from the very last paragraph because they are important. Those who are not vulnerable should immediately be allowed to resume life as normal. Also from that last paragraph, schools and universities should be open for in-person teaching. And in the very last sentence before the signatures from all of the experts who've signed on to this concept, society as a whole, people who are more at risk may participate if they wish in the ongoing activities of society, my side note, while society as a whole enjoys the protection conferred upon the vulnerable by those who have built up herd immunity. Really key, important pieces that stand 180 degrees out of phase with the lockdown initiatives.
Yeah, it's absolutely shocking that this happened to us. When this thing, I'll just tell you a quick anecdote from my mother. When this came about, I called her up and I said, Mom, I'm not sure I should come see you because I think you might be among the vulnerable populations and I might be a COVID carrier. I was just in New York on March 12th. And she said, I understand why you say that. I don't disagree. I don't agree with you, but I'd like to see you. I love you. But listen, just wait a month, because what happens with these new pathogens variants, these new viruses, is that young people get them and get over them, and then it protects old people. So why don't you just schedule your trip here in a month? It'll all be over. I said, okay, Mom, thanks.
Mother knows best.
Yeah,
Knows best, as is usually true.
Right. And what I told I'll tell you something. I'm not sure how much I'm supposed to say, but I told Martin Kulldorff that. He goes, we should make her the head of the CDC.
Well, speaking of Dr. Kulldorff, before we wrap up, I do want to ask you, you have many more people have signed on now, but initially you had these 3 primary signers and almost 36 others. Were any of them reluctant to stick their necks out, or did they say, look, we have to make a statement at this point because of what we've seen?
Believe me, I've felt the need all along to buck them up, protect them, help them understand that they're doing the right thing. But here's what's extraordinary. They didn't need me to do that. They've known from the beginning. They knew that they were going to be facing a barrage of criticism that, but it's sometimes there comes a moment in life when you feel like, once to every man and nation, there comes a time to stand up for what's right and true. They did it not to further their careers. They knew they would be harmed, but they did it because they knew what was right and they care. That's why they did it. It was a humanitarian gesture, and they are strong people, fierce people, intelligent people who understood exactly what was going on and knew exactly what they were facing, and they did it anyway. And I tell you, it inspires me when I think about them all the time, because they don't need me to buck them up. They're on, but they never would have come here. They never would have authored that declaration if they didn't know what they were getting into. They weren't reluctant. They saw a vision and they acted on it, and they regardless of the consequences. Martin himself just said, look, this is what my life is worth. This is why I have a prestige. This is why I have a Harvard position. Now I know why the gods have given me my training, my position, because I was supposed to use it for good. Not to just live a cushy life on tenure, but to do good. This is his example of doing good. Same with Gupta, same with Bhattacharya. Wonderful people, inspiring people.
Those are the 3 primary signers of the Great Barrington Declaration. Once again, it focuses on a strategy that is called focused protection. We've been chatting about it with Jeffrey Tucker, editorial director at the American Institute for Economic Research. If people want to learn more about the Declaration, I'm sure they can go to your website and learn all about it. Where should they go?
Yeah, I would say just, we fixed Google. They tried to bury us over the weekend, but then Senator Cruz intervened and a few other congressmen. Google somehow fixed their algorithms really quickly. So it's the first link now. So we're all good. Yeah.
Very good. And once again, if you want that title, it's the Great Barrington Declaration, Barrington. Jeffrey Tucker, thanks so much for joining us.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And we hope that you will join us again soon for another edition of HeadLocke.